Yes. Well, let's start. And a very, very, very good morning to everybody. I was saying, that doesn't really matter. But last night I looked at the recording for last week just to make sure I didn't repeat anything, not all of it. I shocked myself because I seemed to be very excited last week. I was really kind of on a and with a lot of body language. And so here we go again. And I'll try and be a bit calmer this week. So this is now the fourth of 5 sessions on the 4 Dharmas of Gampopa. As I mentioned last week, I was thinking of extending it so as to at least say the minimum that I think I should say. So that's happened now. And as you probably saw from the emails, then the summary of this course, sort of the main idea, but in one session, the 3 types of Dharma person, has been cancelled, maybe postponed, but if it comes, it will be quite a while from now. It's not just pushed back a little bit. So let's start today with a very, very good motivation. Let's turn our hearts in love and care to all beings, and let's include as many as we possibly can, especially those, as you know, who figured in this life, who still figure in this life, our parents and our siblings, our children, those who've helped us, those who've harmed us, everyone who's really part of our mental landscape in this life. Within ourselves, we need to bring their presence in our consciousness, in our psychology. We need to bring that to liberation. And then they're out there as well in their own right as sentient beings. And our bodhicitta is to help them in this life, or when we meet again and again and again in future lives, that our side of the whole relationship is clear and that we become a friend for them and all beings. So we turn our hearts in love and care to everyone. We try and feel as much love for each of them, including those, especially who've hurt us, as much love as we've ever felt for anyone. And then we feel joy because we have the Dharma, and Dharma is forever, and everything else is impermanent, comes and goes. So let's do our prayers together. Sanje chodon soji chonamla chancho bado dane chapsanje dagi jinso jibe sonamje rola penchera sonje druparisho semchen tamche dewa dang dewe jodang tempara jurche donga dang ji jodang tralwara jurche dongal me pe dewa tampa dang nen tralwara jurche Nerin chadang nitan chalwe Tanyom Chempola ne paranjorenchi. Deyata shame shamavati shameta shadrum. Om kurim arazite karota ke orite jovati oloyane. Bishudani male malapa naye kukure kaka grase grasana. Om mukim param puki am muki shametane sawa graha pandanane nigrihita sawa pawa prawadina vimukta mara pasha sata pita buddha mudra anukatita sava mare butsarita parishude pinga santu sava mara kamane. Holden sawe lama rinpoche, dagi chewara pende denshola. Kadrin chempo gone jezonte, kuson tuche, madrop saldo sol. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. I feel different this end. Normally I find with all my system, I'm quite bleached out. I've got too much light. So although it doesn't show on the screen, I'm actually really in a very, very darkened room so that the image isn't too bleached out. So I feel like I'm talking to you from a cave. So today's a holiday in many, many countries. Here in France, 1st of May, it's a holiday, I think in a few European countries. Some places it's Labor Day. Here is the Fête du Travail. Some places it's Beltane. And so there are all sorts of things. But here in France, then there's a tradition of offering people lily of the valley. It's called muguet. And it's a sort of good luck thing. It smells lovely. So I'd like to offer you all some, whoops, get it in the camera, some lily of the valley. And wish you all the best fortune in the whole wide world. So where are we at? We are looking at the 4 Dharmas of Gampopa. Dharmas become Dharma. Dharma becomes a path. That path is the clearing of illusions. Illusions manifest primordial wisdom. And we've seen that the 4 Dharmas can be used as a template for many things, but in particular for this teaching of the 3 types of precious human existence, or the 3 types of authentic Buddhist. And so the first 3 lines correspond to types 1, 2, 3. And the 4th line is a special case of type 3, the Bodhisattva, in Vajrayana. So far, we saw some things of the first type, the person who still wants to be. We could say a lay Buddhist. We could say good worldly person, but somebody, because we're talking about a precious human existence, somebody whose life is meaningful in the sense that this life will generate better future lives and lives more conducive to Dharma. So our first type of precious human being still needs to be, still got a not quite finished feel yet. If the bus for getting out of samsara all of a sudden turns up at the door and Buddha jumps out and says, "Here we go, are you coming on board?" Probably the thought is, could you come back tomorrow? I've not quite finished my samsara yet. There's still a feeling that maybe you'd find all those hidden dreams. Maybe you'd find whatever it is that you feel is missing. Perhaps it's a good reputation. Perhaps it's being acknowledged. Perhaps it's being loved. Perhaps it's having someone to love. So much of this is a quest for love, a search for love that keeps us embroiled with stuff and people. It can be love of places. Some people get very, very, very attached to places. Things that feel nourishing from the outside. So as long as we're feeding from the outside, it's quite interesting. Just now is the time of baby birds. And there's one small tit that's having to swallow the fact that it has to feed itself. So it comes near the bird food and then it just starts flapping its wings and opening its beak, sort of, "Mummy, feed me." But then Mummy's not feeding it anymore. So then it sort of remembers and goes over to the bird table and feeds itself. But then it comes back next time and it still starts with a little wing flap. first type of precious human being still is looking out there, in places, in objects, and if we talk about it more technically, in experiences coming in through the five senses. You know, it's quite cold and scientific, but if you look at a hug and a kiss in terms of a sort of an analysis, you know, what's happening through your nerves and the sensations you've got and what it stimulates. Something from out there. Sights, sounds, tastes, experiences. So our first type of precious human being still feels that's not quite finished. It's not satisfied. There's a longing for more. But they understand the Buddha's teachings on karma. If you want any chance of getting what your heart is longing for and what you don't have now, or of keeping what you've got through good karma, then one has to practice virtue and avoid non-virtue. And then we saw our second type of precious human being, and that's somebody who no longer needs to be, and has someone who's seen through the terrible price we pay for the pleasures of samsara. So they see samsara as like a house full of snakes. And even if you don't go into the house, while you're away, the snakes are breeding. So as long as you've got a mind that wants and is dissatisfied with what's out there, then you're going to suffer. And so the second type wants out forever, and instead is looking for the satisfaction from the inside, from mind itself, and in particular through the mind, cutting off all of its involvement with sensorial experience and turning inward to its own deep inner absorption in bliss, in peace, and then in the end, through a long journey through bliss and peace, through equanimity. And then we went on to the third type, the Bodhisattva, and I gave you a sketch of the sort of potential that's there. Now, what I want to do to start with today is to talk about authenticity, sincerity, and the fact that when we study these three types of precious human being, what I hope is all the time that none of us are that interested in study for its own sake. Buddha taught to help people. He didn't teach to set up a university. He didn't teach to be clever and present a whole wonderful system to the world. He taught people. Every one of his teachings we have sutras. They're sutras taught at the request of somebody with a question, or somebody asking Buddha, please tell us about this. He didn't make a master plan at the beginning, and then over the following years sit down and say, lesson 1, we're going to have whatever it is. I saw the other day, they've launched a 21-year study program in Trangpa Rinpoche's monastery at Seka, and holding up the program, pages and pages and pages of topics, 21 years. So Buddha didn't start like that. All of his teachings happened through direct interaction. When we study Dharma, it is for you. It's about your mind, your life. And unless we apply the teachings to ourselves, then we're not doing. Now, there's a word in Tibetan, in Sanskrit, is intention, Gampopa, the Buddha's intention. What did the Buddha intend for you and for me, for his disciples? He intended them to take these teachings to heart, and taking them to heart doesn't mean nodding in agreement and saying, gosh, that's so true. It means in each case applying them first and foremost to our own life and seeing how they can help us. So these three types of precious human being are not really three types of precious human being, as it may be in some cases. They are three dynamic aspects in all of us. I think you'll find that. And as I mentioned it earlier, in an earlier Saturday, but it's very important to understand that. There is a bit of you that's still the dissatisfied human being who wants to be. And as your Dharma practice intensifies, you'll find this ancient history of wanting to be and wanting those experiences, wanting a certain relationship with other sentient beings, whether it's one of respect, of love, of fame, or whatever it is, ego. You need to be, and that being is defined by the way we are seen and treated by others. So there's part of us, I think, nearly everyone I know, certainly myself, that is that first type of human being. And so those teachings are very relevant for us. Sometimes there's one part of us that really has had enough and wants out and wants to go deep inside and just find everlasting peace. And then there's one bit of us, which is the Bodhisattva. So please listen to these teachings, not as either a sort of a way of classifying other beings where we look around and think, oh yeah, that one, he's a this, and that one, she's a that. More we think, for myself, what's happening just now as we watch our thoughts, as we're mindful of our thoughts and feelings and intentions, and as we interact within our family, with our parents and children, as we interact with other human beings. Which one's interacting there? First type, second type, third type. So we become aware of these various fibers in our very, very, very complex being. Now, at one point, as we study the three types of precious human being, we have to look into the one point that Gampopa makes is, why did the Buddha teach the way of the Shravakas? And also, why did he teach the way of the first type of precious human beings? Because Buddha was wise and Buddha was compassionate. And so we should never think there is one better Dharma or there's one better path, that the Shravaka path is best or the Bodhisattva path is best. It's like medicine. The best medicine is the one that suits your sickness. You can't say, what's the best medicine? I want to take it. You can't. So Buddha saw that if you tried to take type number one, and we're talking about psychologists, somebody comes to the Buddha, or these days comes to one of our very, very wonderful teachers, and the whole way they are thinking about life, relating to life, is the psychology of the first type of precious human being. They're never going to survive as a monk or a nun, even though sometimes they'll dream of it. I've known a few people who've come to Akon Rinpoche with a dream of doing a 3-year retreat or 4-year retreat. The real reason is they wanted to get away from their wives. They were in a relationship. They couldn't find, can you say, a good excuse to get out. And it's really the truth. And so they had this dream. And one or two did it. But of course, when they get into retreat, then they realize, what have I done now? You're banged up for 3 years and you've got a lot of practice to do, a lot of things to do. And they realize that their motivation wasn't Bodhisattva motivation, or it was really, they felt really stuck before. So when someone comes to a very, very good teacher and to the Buddha, the perfect teacher, then they need to teach what the person can cope with. So when we come to the Shravaka path, which is not just, the first type of precious human being, you can understand they're caught up in life. So a Buddha or a good teacher gives them what they can integrate into their life. But when we come to those who are willing to leave everything, then we might think, why did the Buddha not teach them all the way of Mahayana? And it's because of their psychology and that they couldn't take it. They're not ready for it. They'd give up and then they'd feel really, really bad. And he said, but even though they follow this way we saw last time and the time before, to become an arhat, and they can become an arhat, as far as they're concerned, their journey is over because their mind is now totally in a state of peace. And they think that's it, peace forever. They don't even think peace forever. On the way to that peace forever, they've been thinking that, working towards it. But when it happens, you're gone. It's an absorption. Your mind is gone. It's like when you get an anesthetic for an operation. You're gone. Their mind is absorbed in what we call the fourth dhyana, the fourth level of profound absorption, equanimity. So as far as if one could observe them, anyone's concerned, they're gone. As far as Buddha's concerned, they're far from gone. And so what it says is that within that fourth dhyana, profound absorption, all of a sudden they see a Buddha made of light and they receive empowerments, body, speech, and mind. And they hear a voice coming from the Buddha. It's very nice in the scriptures. It says, "O monks, your path is not yet over. Your work is not yet done." And then he introduces them to the Bodhisattva path. And because they've already got rid of all the mind poisons, that's how they became an arhat. They can go off like a rocket, and then they can take it. And they can become very quickly amazing bodhisattvas. So there's a very, very famous analogy. In the old days in Central Asia, the oceans were far away. They were legendary. It took months to get to them in caravans. But people came back from the oceans in the legends rich because they got pearls and corals and all sorts of precious things. And so in the story, a group of people very enthusiastically form a caravan to go to the distant ocean to make the fortune that's going to last them the rest of their lives. But to get there, they have to cross the deserts, and it's a long journey. So about halfway and in the middle of some godforsaken place, they're all totally depressed and fed up and saying, why on earth did we start out on this? We want to go back. So it says, then the leader of the caravan, who had certain magical, which probably means hypnotic powers, hypnotizes them or casts a spell. And all of a sudden they find themselves in this great oasis. And the food's good and the environment's good and they've got everything they need to relax for enough time to think, yeah, let's carry on now. Yeah, we've got over the blues. Now let's go and make a fortune. So in the story, off they go. They reach the ocean. They make a fortune. They go back home, happy ever after. And so in the analogy, it says the state of the arhat. In other words, let's put this into reality. Leaving everything sensorial, closing the sense gates, closing the doors to samsaric reincarnation, and all the neediness. Can you hear me now? Can you wave a hand? Yes, good. Okay. Yeah, my internet went down, so I think I'm back online now. Good. So where were we? I was talking about how they closed the doors to everything and then the internet shut the door on me. So that when all of that desire for the outside is gone and one retreats deep inside to totally peaceful meditation, this is the necessary way to become a bodhisattva in the longer term for some people, because if they tried the bodhisattva path from the outset, it wouldn't work. So that's why the Buddha taught the Shravaka path. And it's very interesting spending a life with great Rinpoches like I've done, because it brings the story of the Buddha and what the Buddha was doing back to, it brings it to life. And you can understand why he said what he said, how he did what he did. And I saw how this amazing karmic dance where some people receive some teachings and other people just never get there. They never do. As far as they're concerned, the Rinpoche never spoke about that at all. And other people just happened to be there, receive transmissions. So anyway, the history of Dharma and the history of people saying, no, I've heard everything the Buddha said. He never said that. And the fact of the multidimensionality of the Buddha, the fact that he didn't just speak words to human beings, but there were many other beings like Nagas that received the Prajnaparamita teachings and looked after them, and to Nagarjuna and so on. It's very complicated. So anyway, I wanted, and I've spent a bit of time with it, to emphasize the fact that these three types of human beings, precious human beings, are in all of us. And the various teachings we've seen, the view, the meditation practice, the conduct that the Buddha taught, address those parts of us. So now, about sincerity and authenticity. You've seen the ideas. You've seen the ideas. I've seen the ideas. My job's teaching the ideas. But it's about being. So let me take some extreme and rather uncomfortable cases that I've witnessed. People who've been in Dharma a long time, and people who've gone into long retreat and done the deepest practices for one retreat or two retreats or even 3 retreats. And they come out, one of them, still a seeker. Still a seeker. Which means basically you haven't taken refuge. Someone who's taught and teaches the Vajrayana techniques. Very good at the words, perfect at the words. Very accomplished with all the methods, can do all the mudras, play all the musical instruments, do all the mumbo jumbo, as Akon Rinpoche used to call it. Yet in their heart of hearts, still not committed, still seeking, which means they've not even taken refuge. Because when you take refuge properly, you found the sincerity of refuge is so deep. Buddha was the most meaningful, wisest, kindest person that ever graced this earth. Buddha's teaching, the Dharma, is so perfect an expression of reality as it is. And the Sangha are these amazing beings in our world who keep that alive, and the true spirit of renunciation, heartfelt, totally dedicated practice, where you surrender to all the Buddhas that are there right now, ready to help us. all the Bodhisattva Sangha that are there right now. They're blessing the intimacy of contact that we seek at our peril with other human beings. That profound and sacred intimacy with those whose minds are pure is something so wonderful. So refuge goes very, very deep. So there's a sincerity in refuge. And then in taking precepts, there is a seeing from the heart of how human beings hurt each other. Sometimes it's well-intentioned. Very often it's because we use each other for what we really want. People are our furniture. Sorry to say. And we see the damage that's done. And now it starts out with a dream. I think I have to think who's here before I say some things. So I really don't want to offend. But at the same time, I need to share. And I share this often because it's one of the things that's struck me. I don't do it anymore. But for quite some years, I had a license to marry people in Samiling. When I signed the paper, they were married. Government married, legal married. And so that's quite serious. By the time I was marrying some of the later ones, some of the earlier ones I married were already separated, divorced, and they were coming back to Samiling to see Akon Rinpoche to try and sort out their problems or to get his go-ahead to just press the button on the ejector seat and divorce. And so you get this I was in this terrible place, talking to people, telling them, asking them, and putting on a lovely voice. Do you take to be your lawful wedded wife? And then they're there. They've got all their friends and family. They have tears in their eyes. They're so happy. And of course, from me, all I wish for them is deep, deep happiness. We had a special Buddhist wedding ceremony. The feeling when you're that close to a couple, usually deeply in love, and then you invite them to make promises to each other and commitments, and they turn to each other. They can barely get the words out sometimes. They're choking because they're so beautifully overcome with emotion. So you're making it a nice and special moment, but mentally your fingers are crossed behind your back. You're thinking, good luck, good luck. May it really be the exception, because you know that human beings living with each other is very testing, very, very testing indeed. So anyway, I forgot where I started with all of that. But the sincerity of taking precepts is we realize the harm that is done, that starts out with what seems to be a good idea and something that's going to bring you happiness. Very often, our quest for happiness, as soon as it's out there, does damage. Even to get nice food, we harm so much. To get clothes, there's a lot of suffering that comes in the production of clothing. Everything involves damage. So that's the reason we take precepts. That's the sincerity, the authenticity of precepts. And when they're done that way, you're defining yourself forever from now on. From this moment on until enlightenment. or at least until I die in this life, I will never do this, and I will do that. And so we come to the Bodhisattva, and the Bodhisattva's commitments are the Bodhisattva vow. And that is based on something very deep, very powerful. And this is why in the coming days, coming weeks, I've made there's about 9 Saturdays devoted to the Bodhisattva way, because it's so important. But what we need to know about the Bodhisattva is that the Bodhisattva is someone who's taken the commitment. And the commitment needs to be sincere, authentic. And we need to know where things start, what leads to what and leads to what, interdependence, cause and effect. So with samsara, we know samsaric suffering comes from karma. Karma comes from the mind poisons. Mind poisons come from ego delusions. They come from duality, and that comes from ignorance of what is non-dual. We know one thing leads to another, but we can trace back the causes. Why do real bodhisattvas take a vow which is from now until you are Buddha? Not for one day, not 1 week, not 1 lifetime, forever from now on. How do they do that? Because compassion has stirred in them. And they've realized, as I explained last week, if you really want to help everybody, then you need to be like Buddha, who helped more people, more beings than anybody else. So it's that revelation, because of your compassion for everyone, then you know what you must do is become Buddha. It is the noblest, most wonderful thing you can do with all your future lives. Where does the compassion come from that makes you forget self-interest, just dedicate yourself to everyone? It comes from love. Compassion comes from love from all of those other beings. And where does the love come from? The love comes from awareness. And awareness is vital, and we cultivate it usually through the mindfulness. So how can you love somebody else if you're not aware of them? And if we look around us in life, we'll see one of the huge causes of suffering in all sorts of ways. People don't see each other. They only are in self-interest mainly. So becoming aware of other beings, feeling who they are, loving them without being in love with them. It's one thing that Akon Rinpoche warned us about as Buddhist teachers. He said, you need to love every being, but it doesn't mean you need to fall in love with all of them. And it's a whole training, because awareness opens you up to somebody else's world, and they become real to you. This is the very nature of love. We get out of our ego shell, and all of a sudden there's another being, human being, for many people, an animal, a pet. That being becomes real. And because you sense the living, breathing, what makes them happy, what makes them sad, what they like, what they don't like, then you have a love for them, and you really want to bring into their life whatever will make their life better. So we learn to do that without getting involved, but it only comes through awareness. So the authentic So, of course, anyone can go. These days, you can take Bodhisattva vow online even. Anyone can take the vow. My own teacher, Akon Rinpoche, made it a very, very, very serious thing that people had to be very well prepared for and think deeply about. So anyway, whatever it is, the authentic commitment is that you love and care for more and more beings because your mind is more and more aware of what's going on. This gives you unbearable compassion. And you think, despite all my own story, the first type of human being in me, who still feels, could still do a bit of that and could still do a bit of this. And despite the second type of precious human being in me that just wants to leave all of it and go into solitude, quiet, peace. I just love everybody so much. Not because of ego, where I want to be going around saying, I'm Ken, the Bodhisattva. Oh, I love everybody. I'm famous for the way I'm kind and love everybody. Yes. Sort of ego type Bodhisattva. It's not in here. It's not about I am a Bodhisattva. It's about they hurt. And there's just so much useless, meaningless damage everywhere that people are doing through ignorance. So how can I overcome my ignorance so that I know what the truth is, to be able to help them overcome their ignorance? So this Bodhisattva path is the third Dharma of Gampopa. The path that the Dharma has become, the path is the clearing of delusions. So that there's no longer the ignorance that creates suffering. So if we go back now to the technicalities that we study in the lists about the three types of precious human being, then we saw last week that there is view, practice, conduct, and then the result. So the view we saw last week is the view of the two truths, the simultaneity of absolute and relative truths, ultimate relative truths. I better not go back there, because once we start going into that, then it will finish the whole session. So the two truths. The practice is not separate from this view of the two truths. We have to practice. Remember, the practice part, as opposed to conduct, is what we do with ourselves in the intimacy of our own mind, our meditation, our own mind's awakening, maturity. We need to cultivate the two truths. And this is expressed as the union of wisdom and compassion. So our practice is the developing wisdom, developing compassion, and developing the inseparability of those two. When we come to Vajrayana, we'll see that we replace the word compassion with the word skillful means. But skillful means compassion. There's no difference. You can substitute the one for the other. It's just that in Mahayana sutras and texts, we tend to talk of compassion. And in the Vajrayana ones, skillful means, but it means the same thing. So when we have Buddha Vajradhara, then it's the union of the Vajra, the bell, of wisdom and compassion, or wisdom, skillful means. The cultivation of compassion in the Bodhisattvas, our practice, involves what I just mentioned, but in a technical, organized, guided way from our teachers, whereby first we need to open up awareness of other beings. So we have the classical meditations on loving kindness and compassion, where we think of all sorts of beings and we first think of some being that we love very much, we have compassion for very much, and we think of them, we generate love, for instance, and then we replace the person we really love. In Tibetan tradition, it was the mother, with this being or that being or another being, and try and feel the same love. So we, through that, cultivate, try to open up our awareness, not just to beings that we meet in this life, but other realms of beings, the 6 realms, divine beings that normally we don't experience, or beings in such horrible realities like ghosts and spirits and so on, or other dimensions like nagas. Then we become aware of them through the Buddha's teachings, if we don't have any unusual personal experience of them. And we start to get a vision of the vastness of living existence, and how in those terms we are just one tiny part, but like the Buddha, we can become a tiny part that gets better and better, that can really have something to give, more and more to give to all those other beings. So in the development of compassion, then what Gyatso Rinpoche taught and what Gampopa teaches is that there are 3 levels of compassion. The first one is what most people think of as compassion, which is, compassion is always a response to suffering, our response to suffering. So it's obvious compassion for obvious suffering. In the Tibetan text, it's called suffering which is suffering, or suffering which hurts. So that's what worldly people can also have as compassion. We witness pain, physical pain, mental pain, and it stirs our heart, and we long to be able to help in some way and relieve the pain. Like just now, there's a lot of stuff coming up on Facebook, pray for India, help India, because people are seeing the suffering on their screens. Is terrible. And so people are moved. So witnessing suffering when it's happening. Now, already the Bodhisattva's compassion is different from worldly compassion, because ideally it's happening all the time, not just when it's triggered by outside circumstances haphazardly. Suffering is there every second of every minute of every day. One thing that struck me in Samiling, when I was more sort of hands-on in the administration and dealing with the media, is something would happen. A plane would crash, and all of a sudden 160 people dead. And the local TV would phone up and say, "Oh, the plane crash is terrible. Are you doing special prayers for the victims, for the people who died and their families?" Very hard thing to answer, because the answer is no, we're not. Because we know that every day in this world, so many hundreds of thousands of people die from all sorts of causes. It's the worldly delusion that death somehow is an exception. Oh, somebody died, this is terrible. Every moment, right now, during the course of this talk, how many tens of thousands of people will die in the world and leave bereaved relatives behind from all sorts of causes. So though, of course, when it's vivid, it's not how things normally happen, like in India just now with the COVID, of course, it's terrible. But the Bodhisattva is trying to be aware as many times a day as possible that suffering doesn't go away because we're not thinking about it. It's there, and each being who is suffering is as dear as your dearest friend, as your own children, as your own loved ones. And they're hurting right now. and some of them hurting so bad. So the Bodhisattva's compassion isn't sporadic, momentary when triggered. It's an awareness all the time of the suffering that's in the universe. But still, it's the first type of suffering when it's actually hurting. It gets worse because we come to the second type of suffering, which isn't happening yet. And it's the suffering that people have created by their karma. They've sown the seed of future suffering, but that seed hasn't ripened. Or just now they're having a good time. Perhaps a stereotypic but very vivid example. We just had in Samiling, there were a big campaign to stop a shooting range being set up, within earshot, heavy military weapons. But before that, every year people come up to shoot the birds, the grouse and the pheasants. And so you hear in the shooting season, poof, poof, bang, bang, poof, poof, bang, bang. And you know that at least half the time, that's a bird's life come to an end and a happy hunter. So although the hunter isn't suffering just now, on the contrary, they're really happy. There's all that deluded pride of killing and taking home, being a good shot. For the Bodhisattva, although there's compassion for the bird that's shot, there's just as much compassion for the hunter who's now made themselves a bit more karma, and they're going to suffer wretchedly for it in the future. Karma, cause and effect. So the second type of suffering is the one that's put in the pipeline in our ignorant quests for happiness and satisfaction. And so the Bodhisattva is aware of that and developing compassion to amongst other things, to the victimizers as well as to the victims. This is hard. It takes a lot of deep reflection to work out that it's what the Bodhisattva does. And then for the Bodhisattva, it's a very, very big training to really and truly, sincerely feel as much compassion for people who do horrid victimizing things as for their victims. So it's called the suffering of change. And it's also, in a shorter term, it's an awareness of impermanence and seeing that the more people cling to this for their happiness, the more they're going to hurt when this goes away. If it's their strength and their health, when they get old, when they get sick, they're going to lose it. If it's their home and their possessions, these things change anyway. So Bodhisattva's got a lot of suffering to think about, the suffering when it hurts, all the time in all the realms, non-stop around us. The suffering of change because there's all of that unripened karma that people are making just now, trying to be happy. But then there's a third one, which is existential suffering, which is the fact, and it says, most of us can't get this. We can understand the words, but you don't feel it. It's the compassion felt by those who have deep spiritual Dharma experience, when your mind is free, when your mind tastes, in our case, Buddha nature, the blessing of the lineage, the presence of the Buddhas, the freedom in meditation when the mind is just clear, so quiet. And to realize that 99.9% of our fellow human beings have never tasted that experience. And they're still struggling to make life out there work for them. Other people, life circumstances, when all the time there's been this total perfection, this natural harmony that's inside all of us, the primordial goodness that permeates every cell of the universe. So when there is some experience of this, there is a huge compassion for people striving for temporary happiness and in their strife, shutting their minds to the opportunity through meditation and deep practice to have this best of all experience. So the Bodhisattva's training involves the inner work, a lot of thought, a lot of meditation, a lot of simple visualizations of the mother and substituting other beings for the mother and so on, that cultivate 3 levels of compassion. And in particular, the most important is the deepest one. So the Bodhisattva is doing everything he or she can to awaken the mind to this deep and perfect and totally satisfying truth. Because when that is there, the 3rd type of compassion for beings unaware of freedom, compassion comes naturally. It's called non-conceptual, spontaneous, perfect compassion. Natural is compassion that is natural to our mind. We don't need to provoke it with thoughts, with techniques. It's there. It's like a wellspring that we can open up. So the practice is cultivating those 3 sorts of compassion, but then we can't separate that from the other aspect of practice, which is wisdom, wisdom and compassion. Because in particular, the wisdom is what will make the 3rd type of compassion become real. The wisdom of the truth of mind. Wisdom of the truth of mind. This mind that we are. Now, this takes interdependence that the first type of precious human being didn't know too much about, except that there is karma and it produces results. The second type of precious human being knows about interdependence in terms of the creation of delusion of our ego, and that by getting rid of ego, one gets rid of samsaric rebirth forever, but it stops there. The Bodhisattva knows the whole story of interdependence. We can put it that way. The other way is to say that the Bodhisattva has the wisdom to overcome the 2 obscurations. So let's look at it simply, roughly, the first way. We take interdependence to its deepest level. And let's apply it to ourselves. And probably most of us grew up imbibed with the knowledge that comes through our culture, our society, through science. And science has always been based on matter. Matter, stuff you can measure, sort of. There's so much to explain. So much. What do I want to say? I wanted to say so many things today. There's matter, and we can measure matter, and we're used to a science where things can be measured because they're made of atoms and they're material. Psychology, anything to do with mind, is in general, apart from philosophers' musings, the introduction of psychology into science is very new, last 100 years or so. But what I want you to think about is this, because it's a real eye-opener if you've not thought of it already. Two things are happening. You experience. Right now, you're hearing sounds, you're seeing sights. It's kind of fresh every moment. You're probably looking at this screen, seeing this. hearing this. That's real. Moment after moment, life brings us a real experience, which is sensorial, or it's in our sixth consciousness, mind consciousness. That's happening moment after moment. And the previous moment of it, gone. The next moment of it, not happened yet, but right now, something quite vivid. Now, parallel to that living experience, we rationalize. We make sense of it to ourselves through blah, 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 that we learned. So we can label, we can describe, like a commentator for a horse race. Our mind can be describing what's happening. There's this kind of background chat going on. Now that rationalization is incredibly arbitrary. You see when you have a squabble with somebody and then you're one bit of the dialogue saying, oh, the rotten pig, and I shouldn't have, like that it is. And then another bit of you, the Bodhisattva, say, no, it's your past mother. This is a bit like Gollum in the Lord of the Rings. You've got various, and you can opt for one or the other. The rationalization, the story can be anything. But the actual experience, each moment, is what it is. So we're used, through our education and upbringing and all the things we read about the latest developments in science, the latest developments in thinking, the way our human morality is evolving, because now we respect these people and we don't use this kind of language because it's not, and so on. We're so informed by so much stuff. But basically, when we think of karma, cause and effect, and interdependence, I think the way we think is very much to do with a scientific material reality where there's this and it makes this happen. So the whole universe out there is kind of working through causality. What Mahayana does, so what the Bodhisattva needs to understand, is that everything is your mind. Not that it's happening out there independent of you, like billiard balls, bang, poof, one's knocking another one. One cause is triggering this, that's triggering other things. Or in our mind, which is separate from matter out there, and one thought's triggering another. Everything is mind. No separate material reality. And the interdependence is not just what's going on out there. It's to do with you and your perception and your consciousness and your mind karma. This is huge. This is huge. So that was a general note about the way we tend to be approaching the teachings with a mindset which is very informed by our upbringing and the input we're getting, the informing ideas coming in through what we read every day and so on. So in the more formal type of teaching, then we have wisdom and compassion, three sorts of compassion. The wisdom training is to bring the view of the two truths to life in oneself so that we understand the nature of our mind absolutely, mind as it really is, and the interdependence that's made our relative reality, Ken's world, where this person appears like this, where this situation appears like that. So it's not out there. We have to fathom something very, very, very deep. I don't know if I can do it in 5 minutes, but I'll try to give you a clue as to where I'm going with this, because lots of people ask the same questions. It's kind of, oh, just a minute. If all this, are you saying all of this is my mind? You know, like what's happening in this country right now where the troops are moving in and doing these things to people. That's my mind. Am I doing this? If it's all my mind? No, it's not saying that. We have to put two things together. What's happening in the whole endless, unimaginable universe where we are one tiny, tiny, tiny speck of an endless reality. It's not just one amongst trillions or zillions. There is no end. So just thinking about that long enough for it to sink in. Beings without end. It's like these days now we know that if you could put our solar system, if it was the size of the head of a pin, then our galaxy with all the other solar systems would be a radius of 13 kilometers. And that's just our galaxy. Our galaxy is one amongst billions. So we've got this idea of how unimaginably vast space is. And then when you go from the universe to multiverses and quantum, it's mind-boggling. So then within those seemingly material universe, the number of sentient beings, the diversity of their experience is endless. So we are one tiniest part of that. So in that way, we are very, very, very tiny. But in another way, whatever all of that is, however vast and however many sentient beings they are, all we know of it, what we call the world, is whatever has gone in here. And we see that, let's bring it back down to a local level. You know, one person that we know. Our relationship with that one person is unique. Nobody else has the same contact, the same interaction with that person. It comes as a surprise to us. I think one of the biggest surprises is when we see somebody we love in love with somebody else. And it brings out a whole dimension. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but it brings out a whole, what? And you realize just how diverse human experience can be. You know, who your children think you are, what you are for your children, what you are or were for your parents. Whatever we call the world is just, for me, Ken's perception of the world based on each living moment of experience that really happened. It's happening right now, this moment. And then we've got this whole rationalization of how we make sense of it with stories. And those stories are very, very important. So when it comes to the two truths, we need to understand what this mind of ours really is, and how over hundreds, thousands of lifetimes, it has solidified stories and realities that became our karma, and how they are relatively real, but they are impermanent and they are interdependent. And because they don't stay even for 1 second of real reality, they come and go. Our life is a series of flashes of experience. Then it's like a dream. We shouldn't underestimate it. That dream is powerful, but it is like a dream. So the Bodhisattva in the practice, the intimate part, has to work through this again and again, understand the power of the relative dream, its interdependence, but not as something out there, but more as something to do with one's own mind stream. Because by changing our mind stream radically, the appearance of reality and its effect on us will change. As we develop that kind of knowledge of all is mind, but what is mind in its vastness, where we're a tiny speck of it, but in another way where the whole, what we call the world or the universe, is just our story of perception. We have to sort all of that out, but at the same time, what is this mind that produces and has produced and is producing and will produce until we're Buddha these relative realities? What is this mind that I am, that's here right now? So we have the words, it's the union of voidness and clarity and all of those lovely things you see in the poems. But what the hell does that really mean? We need expert meditation guidance in order to bring the view to life so that our eyes see more and more with wisdom. Maybe I should stop just now, but while we're on eyes, there are 5 types of eyes or 5 types of seeing in Dharma. Got to have a number, so 5. So first one is called water bubble eyes. That's these, because they're like water bubbles, blobs. And so they see what they see. They see light waves. Simple as that. We know the optics of it. And of course, you can't see through walls. So there's all the limitations of light and human eyes and optical visual cortex and all the rest of it. Then there's divine vision, where the power of a mind which is open and can sense things informs the water bubble eye and the visual cortex so that you can see things which are microscopic, far away, on the other side of walls, and so on. Distant in time and space, very, very big or very, very small. So this is one of the qualities of the devas. And when our mind, particularly through shamatha practice, reaches the levels of dhyana absorption, then this divine eye will be acquired. We can see a little bit into the future. We can have knowledge of past lives. And it sort of comes as in a visionary way. And then the third type is Dharma eyes, where Dharma has become so much of us, part of us, that we see things through the love and the compassion and the peace that the Buddha taught us. So the whole way we're looking on other beings, we're looking on our life circumstances, we're looking on our own mind, is a Dharma way. The fourth type of eye is called Pranja eye, wisdom eye. And they're all that we find in Prajnaparamita, wisdom teachings. So it's like the Dharma eye, but there's a certain light of wisdom that's there, more, even more. So we don't just see things as they are, we have wisdom of voidness. And then the last one's jhana eye, which is the Buddha's eye, where things are seen from Buddha nature, from the heart of the heart, and known from the heart of the heart. So let's finish there for today. And then next week, we'll finish the formal teachings on the Bodhisattva way, mainly about the result. And then we'll go on to the specific case of the 4 dharmas of Gampopa related to Vajrayana practice. So thank you all very, very, very much. And let me put you all back on screen week, and let's dedicate everything that was good. Sonam, diye, tamche, zikbane, tobne, nyepe, dranam, pomchene, jeganachi, palap, trupaye, Sipit sole drowa rasho. Janchop semcho rinpoche. Ma jepanam je druchi. Jepan yampa mepadam kongne. Kongnu pelwarasho. Thank you all. Bye-bye. See you soon.
Thank you.